Will there be new negotiations between Ukraine, the USA, and Russia this autumn? What did the Kremlin reply to Budanov's statement? Supporting Ukraine first and foremost, Warsaw is ready to jointly produce missiles for Patriots with Kyiv on its territory. The Pentagon wants Europe to take on its own conventional defense and support for Ukraine. Ukraine is strengthening its positions in the Donetsk region, while the State Duma has called for open bombing of Ukrainian cities. We will talk about all this and more next on Ukraine Today. Please like and subscribe. The Russians are massively attacking Ukraine using ballistics, cruise missiles, and hundreds of drones. Meanwhile, the Kremlin continues to invest in missiles and the expansion of its war, which means more effort must be made to counter this. This was stated by the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy. This week, there were important decisions regarding the strengthening of Ukrainian air defense from our European allies. It is important that they are also supplemented with ballistic defense packages, primarily through Patriot. To discourage the Russians from wanting to continue fighting, it is necessary to effectively intercept the missiles that Moscow clings to so much in order to continue the war. I am grateful to everyone who understands this and helps, the head of state summarized. Ukraine is strengthening its positions in the Donetsk region. In particular, there is a change in the command of the groups. Next, more details on what to expect from the new appointments.
Anti-drone nets over the streets, boarded up windows, damaged high-rise buildings, shops, and burnt-out cars. This is what Sloviansk and Kramatorsk look like now. The Russian Federation is systematically destroying the city's civilian infrastructure.
It's a nightmare, very intense. I was even scared. I got scared. I hid. It's the cursed Russians shelling us.
Less than 20 kilometers to the front line.
Yesterday, everything was perfectly fine and calm. Today, however, it is just explosions.
The occupiers are redeploying assault infantry and looking for weak spots in the Ukrainian defense. The enemy's goal is to capture advantageous heights and create conditions for a further offensive on Sloviansk.
Russian forces are likely prioritizing attacks on the southern bank of the Siversky Donets River and from Oleksandrivka towards Mykolaiivka, attempting to capture local tactical heights and create more favorable conditions for an offensive on Sloviansk, bypassing difficult terrain and fortified Ukrainian defenses in the northeast, conducting a dual tactical operation to combine elements to simultaneously launch an offensive on the settlement from dominant territory in the east and south.
Previously, the invaders had already attempted to bypass Sloviansk from the northeast through Lyman. However, the Ukrainian side, the difficult terrain and numerous water obstacles complicated their advance.
Up to 5 combined armies are involved. A separate army corps, along with additional forces and assets from a tank division of the airborne troops, as well as naval infantry, and various other specialized units. In terms of the scale of forces and assets involved in conducting the Sloviansk-Kramatorsk offensive operation, the enemy has concentrated a grouping in these directions that exceeds in volume those strategic forces of the Russian Federation that invaded the entire territory of Ukraine in February 2022. This testifies to the importance that the Russian military command attaches to conducting this operation.
In order to stop the enemy and push them back, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Drapatyi, made important personnel changes.
The steady advance of Russian troops noticeably slowed down, following the significant change in command of the 11th Army Corps, which altered their operational momentum. This was especially noticeable in April and May, but the movement process continued nonetheless.
Now, instead of Brigadier General Oleksiy Mostrenko, who took charge of the corps in April, Emil Ishkulov has been appointed.
Drapatyi appointed Emil Ishkulov, the former brigade commander of the 80th Air Assault Brigade, as the person responsible for the defense of Kramatorsk. He was the only one who directly pointed out the risks of the Kursk operation to Sirsky, after which he was immediately dismissed and the risks were not addressed. An experienced commander who is respected in the army and values the truth on the battlefield.
Ishkulov has been on the front line since 2014. He previously commanded the 80th Separate Air Assault Galician Brigade and was later the deputy commander of the 7th Air Assault Corps. The 11th Corps is responsible for defense in the Sloviansk direction and borders the 19th Army Corps, which is now led by paratrooper Valery Skret. Now, 2 officers from the air assault forces are leading corps along the front line in the area of Kostiantynivka, Drushkivka and Kramatorsk. These personnel changes are linked to the need to strengthen defense in this critical direction due to the growing threat of an active enemy offensive. At the moment, the invaders are conducting a dual tactical operation.
They are succeeding in implementing infiltration tactics, penetrating the ranks of the forward units of the armed forces of Ukraine. This allows the main forces of the units and formations advancing in the offensive zones of the respective armies and the enemy to move forward.
According to the head of the Sloviansk State Military Administration, in August, Russian troops significantly intensified their attacks on Sloviansk and also began using Smerch and Tornado-S multiple launch rocket systems.
Well, in short, I heard it flying. I fell down there, shrapnel was raining down all the way over there. The car was destroyed. The car was, it also got caught in an explosion back on March 2nd. The car was torn apart. My mother-in-law lived in Dobrapilya in the Dobrapilya district. Her house was destroyed.
Besides the threat of airstrikes by Kyivs, the drone attack threat hasn't gone anywhere. Against the backdrop of the deteriorating security situation, local authorities are urging civilians to leave the city.
The occupiers are destroying logistics. That is their task. The sooner a person leaves the city, the better. However, I cannot say right now that it is safe. Unfortunately, the Russians are striking the outskirts of the city more and more often, so evacuating civilians from there is becoming increasingly difficult.
Will Putin and his army be able to capture the last major agglomeration in the Donbas by the end of this year?
The chances that they will actually manage to capture the very last major urban agglomeration still controlled by Ukraine in the Donbas region by the end of this year, I would honestly estimate at about 50-50. It is a very difficult situation to predict with any real certainty.
Ukrainian defenders are doing everything possible and continue to hold back the onslaught of Russian troops, striking at the enemy's logistics and offensive potential.
Russia needs to start bombing Ukrainian cities to force Ukrainians to surrender. This was openly stated by Deputy Speaker of the State Duma Pyotr Tolstoy. We are calling for demoralizing the public to such an extent that they come out to meet our troops with their paws up, ranted Speaker Petya. Perhaps this is all you need to know about the value of statements from the Russian Defense Ministry, the Kremlin, and Putin himself, according to which the Russian military strikes only at military targets and the infrastructure of the armed forces of Ukraine. According to The Economist's count, in July alone, the Russian military fired a record 198 ballistic and hypersonic missiles at Ukraine. Most of them were aimed at the Ukrainian capital, but this has not broken and will not break the spirit of Ukrainians, and there will definitely be a response from the defense forces. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Mikhailo Drapatyi, visited the units holding the defense in the Oleksandrivka direction. At the same time, Drapatyi has staged a real revolution within the armed forces. More on this next.
Mikhailo Drapatyi is currently appointing the most competent leaders to technical positions within the armed forces of Ukraine. This was written by the President's advisor on the development of defense technology areas, Serhiy Beskresnov, with the call sign FLASH in his Telegram blog.
And the main thing is that these new leaders are energetic, modern, and communicative. I believe that big positive changes await us. But this will not happen quickly, because a lot needs to be changed.
Stanislav Bunyatov, with the call sign Osman, also reported on the positive dynamics in combat units.
In 2014, it became clear that Battalion Commander Drapatyi was a strong-willed, proactive, and decisive commander. Subsequently, Drapatyi established himself as a successful crisis manager. During the Russian breakthrough in the Kharkiv region, it was Drapatyi who was redeployed to contain the Russian offensive, and in a very short time, Drapatyi managed to stabilize the situation in that sector. Furthermore, Drapatyi managed to significantly stabilize the situation in the Pokrovsk direction, and moreover, to seize the initiative. Russian public channels reported on Drapatyi's counter-offensive at that time. It is precisely thanks to Drapatyi's decisive actions that the occupiers have been unsuccessfully storming this direction for over 2 years now. And there is currently no talk of any complete advance or capture of the Pokrovsk agglomeration.
In addition, TSN military correspondent Yulia Kiriyenko noted that Valery Skret has finally been appointed commander of the 19th Corps, which is currently defending the Kramatorsk-Kostiantynivka-Druzhkivka direction. Before this, Skret had been acting commander for a month.
We see that at the moment the situation on the line of combat contact has been significantly stabilized. In addition, Drapatyi continued the successful actions of the Ukrainian Defense Forces in the Oleksandrivka direction. Over the past month, during the time Drapatyi has been in the position of Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the Ukrainian Defense Forces have deoccupied 150 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory.
Drapatyi himself, on the 35th anniversary of independence, addressed Ukrainians and did not hide the complexity of the situation, and also warned that Ukraine's struggle would continue.
I will not tell you that it will be easy ahead. I command an army that is fighting a difficult battle every day. I know our fatigue, I know our losses, I know the price of the decisions that have to be made.
At the same time, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine noted the strength of the people who, after everything they have been through, continue to do their job. And he added that Ukraine still has a difficult struggle for independence ahead. But the Ukrainian people know what they are fighting for.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
The defense forces may have attacked the command posts of the Russian occupiers in temporarily occupied Donetsk with a new American JDAM-ER long-range cruise missile, which has a range of about 550 kilometers. This is evidenced by photographs of ammunition debris published online, writes Defense Express. The missile can be launched from any aircraft capable of using standard JDAMs. In Ukraine, these could be F-16s, MiG-29s, or Su-27s. Let me remind you, OSINT analysts reported that in Donetsk the missiles penetrated a two-level underground parking garage of a residential complex that was being used as an enemy command post. The day before, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine confirmed the missile strike on the main and reserve command posts of the Russian invaders in Donetsk. The occupiers won't see the dawn. The Russian satellite program intended to replace Starlink is failing. The ambitious plan to launch 250 satellites into orbit by 2027 has already failed. The defense forces are, of course, involved in this as well. Details in the report.
They didn't manage to catch up and overtake. The Russian Rasvet satellite program, which positions itself as an analog to Starlink, is suffering a complete fiasco.
It must be said that comparing Starlink and Rasvet is like comparing a Tesla to a walk-behind tractor. Both have engines, wheels, and both move. But the difference is very, I would say, significant.
So, having launched the first 16 satellites, Roscosmos solemnly reported that the scheme is set up, the principle is understood, and by 2027 there will be 250 such units in orbit.
Russia has set a goal for itself by 2027 to create conditions so that 24/7 coverage of the entire territory of Ukraine is provided by the Russian satellite constellation.
But, as it turned out, it's not that simple. Of the second batch, launched in mid-July, to date, not a single one of the 16 Rasvet satellites has risen above 360 kilometers. This is approximately 200 kilometers lower than what the first group reached in the same amount of time. In 2 of the 16 satellites, the engines didn't even turn on, and right now they are slowly descending until they eventually burn up in the atmosphere. At the same time, out of the 14 satellites that are still intact, only 11 are entering orbit as planned. The remaining 3 were also unable to perform the necessary maneuvers and will subsequently, obviously, also burn up in the atmosphere. At the same time, officially in the Russian Federation, the launch was declared successful and no reports of failures regarding the Rasvet Dawn satellites have been made.
The Rasvet satellites currently have stated specifications. Let's recall, say, the Armata tank, for example, its stated specifications versus the real ones. And so, well, we can get an approximate answer.
Despite the fact that the Kremlin's ambitious program is falling apart on just the second launch, to achieve at least some tangible result, they need to carry out at least 12 and a half. And naturally, this is taking into account that all satellites will successfully reach orbit.
The Russian Bureau 1440, in essence, took about 3 years to launch 16 satellites into orbit. And in order for the constellation to fully meet the needs of the Russian command, specifically on the territory of Ukraine, they need to have at least 250 satellites in orbit. That is at least 16 launches of large Soyuz 2.1B launch vehicles. And as of today, Russia only carries out a few launches of this type of launch vehicle per year.
But Putin and Russian propaganda, for that matter, are not interested in these facts. They continue to boast about the first successful launch and loudly declare that they are challenging Elon Musk and that Razvet itself surpasses Starlink.
One of the most important advantages of Starlink is the 10,000 satellites in orbit. If 200 are lost, nothing will happen. It will keep working. 16 satellites can be shot down, let's say, hypothetically, Russian ones. Because right now, especially when it comes to low-orbit satellites, there are literally missiles that can be launched from airplanes or from the ground, from ground-based installations that can shoot down satellites.
But it probably won't come to Star Wars. Ukraine is already starting to turn the Russian Razvet Dawn into a complete sunset. The program is being developed by the Progress Enterprise, which was attacked by our Flamingos last week. There is information that this has already partially disrupted the project's implementation timeline.
Obviously, our military and political leadership is concerned about the Russians' attempts to create a sort of Starlink analog system over, at the very least, the theater of military operations over Ukraine.
But even if the Russian Federation manages to assemble some number of satellites, it will definitely not be able to reach the scale of Starlink. The main task in the Russian Federation today is not global satellite communication for the world, but coverage at least on the Russian-Ukrainian front. And even with such a minimal task, it is unlikely to succeed.
To completely cover at least a small area there, well, small by space standards, say a radius of 900 kilometers, for example, to cover all of that with stable communication, it would take, well, probably another 2 years at the pace at which Razvet is being launched.
But Ukraine is significantly trying to reduce these rates. While Kyiv still has a few years, the military leadership is actively working on destroying the Russian Razvet, including through long-range strikes, and a system for jamming Russian satellites is also being developed. And as experts say, there is success on both counts.
The Kremlin is unaware of the plans and specific timelines for the next round of trilateral negotiations between Russia, the USA, and Ukraine. The so-called press secretary of the Russian dictator, Dmitry Peskov, commented on the statement by the head of the office of the president of Ukraine, Kyrylo Budanov, who allowed for the possibility of a new meeting as early as September. However, Russia continues contacts with the US regarding Ukraine at a working level, Peskov said. The first visit of the CIA director to Moscow since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. While the White House and the Kremlin maintain a policy of silence, analysts are speculating about why John Ratcliffe visited Moscow and who, in fact, he met with there. Ukraine, Iran, North Korea, China. Did these countries make it to the top of the discussion topics? Or perhaps the Americans were trying to stop Putin from attacking NATO?
To reach an agreement on ending the war in Ukraine, to sound out the Kremlin's position on the war in Iran, to prepare for Trump's meeting with the leaders of China and North Korea, and even to warn Russia against getting involved in a war with NATO. Against the backdrop of silence from official sources, analysts are guessing why CIA Director John Ratcliffe paid a visit to Moscow. Even though it is not known for sure exactly who the American met with. The VCHK OGPU channel, which is close to the security services, claims that the CIA director met with representatives of the FSB. But whether a meeting with Putin actually took place remains unknown. The dictator's press pool reported some changes in his schedule. According to the channel, Ratcliffe departed ahead of schedule, and immediately after his visit, mysterious activity was recorded in Moscow.
On Sunday, 2 aircraft took off from Vnukovo with a short interval, an Il-76 in the afternoon and a Tu-214 from the government squadron in the middle of the day. This usually happens on the eve of Putin's visits to other countries. They transport Putin's car, an advanced security team, and so on. Ratcliffe arrived today. Putin was definitely in the Kremlin today, so they most likely met in person. Immediately after Ratcliffe, a plane from the Rossiya Special Flight Detachment took off from Moscow.
Analysts describe the current CIA director as a supporter of Ukraine who takes a tough stance on Russia and China. But whether the Russian-Ukrainian war was discussed during the contacts is a question, especially since Kushner and Witkoff have been appointed as the ones responsible for this track overseas. And Moscow, as well as Trump himself, are unlikely to agree to a role reversal, experts believe. Iran is a different matter, another sore spot for Donald's administration.
The issue of Iran was most likely discussed. Let me remind you that Scott Bessent, the US Treasury Secretary, has just put forward a major plan to pressure Iran specifically through economic means. And this document states that Iran's partners, those who support it in sensitive areas, will not have an easy time. And of course, Russia is one of those partners. It seems to me that there were certain threats from the US right here. There is something to bargain with here. Let's put it this way. We have things we don't like, but we might be able to make concessions on something. I don't believe at all that the Chinese issue was touched upon, because the relationship between Washington and Beijing is not a topic for the Kremlin at all. The Kremlin is not the kind of entity, not the kind of constant that can influence them.
The unannounced secret visit of the CIA director to Moscow is the first visit by an American official of this rank since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Before that, his predecessor flew in to meet with Putin in the fall of 2021. He was supposed to warn the Kremlin against military aggression, but as history has shown, in vain. The current trip is taking place against the backdrop of reports that Putin is ready to give the order to test NATO's resolve. And in the fact that the CIA director's plane arrived and flew back to Riga, analysts also see a hint about the topic of the meeting.
The route itself, which was chosen by Ratcliffe in order to visit Moscow on such a sudden trip, draws attention. Well, many are pointing out that the CIA director's plane departed from Riga, and the very choice of this route, well, also signals a certain message, right, that the Americans still have. Despite all the wavering of the Trump administration, the Americans still have allies on NATO's eastern flank. And the stop in Riga and the departure from that city, it seems to me, is a sufficiently telling and eloquent gesture directed at the new possible true goals of the visit. Therefore, I would take quite seriously the Wall Street Journal's interpretation that this is a fairly serious attempt by the Trump administration to truly show that the US still has interests in the region, still has military obligations, among other things, and that the US is closely monitoring any plans for further escalation. It is obvious that the Russian authorities are proceeding from the idea that the US has abandoned Europe, that Trump is not interested in the affairs of the European part of NATO, and that Europe is left to fend for itself. In this sense, this gesture is, well, very telling, precisely in the context of a possible warning that this does not fully correspond to reality and that the US is not ready to part with its traditional allies. How this will be interpreted in Russia, well, that's an open question, because ultimately everything comes down to Putin's worldview.
In Russia itself, they initially pretended not to notice the plane landing with the American guest. Later, Dmitry Peskov stated that the CIA director had only met with his counterparts, which means that the countries may be negotiating the exchange or release of US citizens from Russian captivity. The media did indeed notice that 3 decrees were not published on the Kremlin's website, effectively classifying the decisions. But who these individuals are, for whom Trump sent the head of the CIA himself to Moscow, if he even sent him for that reason at all, remains a mystery.
U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Strategy and Force Development Elbridge Colby stated at NATO headquarters in Brussels that the United States expects Europe to take primary responsibility for its own conventional defense, as well as a leading role in supporting Ukraine. He confirmed that the U.S. had indeed sent a questionnaire to European allies, asking them to provide their assessments and plans regarding the future redistribution of roles. At the same time, Colby emphasized once again that Europe remains a critically important interest for the United States, even when Washington prioritizes the Western Hemisphere. Polish Deputy Minister of National Defense Paweł Zalewski stated that his country possesses the production capacity and is ready, in cooperation with Ukraine, to begin manufacturing PAC-3 interceptor missiles for Patriot systems on its territory. He added that such a move, of course, should be supported not only by NATO but also by Ukraine, perhaps first and foremost by Ukraine. It is important that we have our own capacity, we have the expertise, and we would like to join this production. And if it turns out that this will be done jointly with the Ukrainians or with the Germans or with both the Ukrainians and the Germans, that is good, because we do not want to compete, we want to strengthen our security, emphasized Paweł Zalewski. President Zelenskyy has awarded American billionaire and SpaceX owner Elon Musk the Order of Liberty. Why now? And is Musk still refusing to let Ukraine use Starlink for strikes on Russian territory? We will look into it. And in the meantime, don't forget to like this episode.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has awarded American entrepreneur and engineer Elon Musk the Order of Liberty. The head of state signed the corresponding decree on August 26th. The document states that Musk was recognized for his outstanding personal contributions to protecting human life and freedom, as well as for developing relations between Ukraine and the United States. The Order of Liberty is the highest state award of Ukraine that can be bestowed upon foreigners and stateless persons. The decision to award Musk came against the backdrop of a controversial history surrounding his company, SpaceX, and the Starlink satellite system. After the start of Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022, Ukraine gained access to Starlink. Satellite communication allowed the Ukrainian military to maintain contact and transmit data where ground infrastructure had been damaged or destroyed. However, serious disputes subsequently arose regarding the use of Starlink. In particular, Ukraine attempted to expand the system's capabilities for operations against Russian military targets. At the end of July, The Atlantic reported that Kyiv wanted to use Starlink for strikes against Russian ballistic missile launchers. And in early August, former Minister of Defense Mikhailo Fedorov stated that he continues negotiations with Musk on expanding Starlink's operation within Russian territory.
We are in communication with Musk. We spoke last time a few days ago. Yes, it is, let's say, a difficult task right now, how to achieve the result that we need to achieve in this communication. And the communication is ongoing right now. I cannot disclose all the details, but we will do everything to achieve the result.
According to the Financial Times, Zelenskyy also asked US President Donald Trump to discuss this issue with Musk. However, as the publication claimed, Trump refused to intervene. At the same time, reports had previously appeared about the problem of Russian troops using Starlink. The Russians began installing the system's terminals on attack drones. After that, Ukraine, together with SpaceX, introduced terminal verification and a so-called whitelist to disable unauthorized devices.
We managed to do this at the end of January or the beginning of February, as far as I remember. To enable Starlink on the territory of our country for the Russians? Because in reality, people do not understand what kind of risk that was. And for us, this could have been a catastrophe because Starlink and Shaheds with Starlink mean the ability to control each Starlink manually, say from Moscow. It's the ability to fly over roads, change trajectories outside of our radars and acoustic sensors, take out all our F-16s, Patriots, and strike all military targets. So it was a major risk.
Musk himself has repeatedly been involved in public disputes over support for Ukraine, and his position on the war and the use of Starlink has drawn criticism in Kyiv.
From the very beginning of the full-scale invasion, we did indeed have communication, and I personally had communication with Elon Musk. And it was very important for us not to lose the society that had fallen under occupation. And then at some point, Elon started changing his point of view, and every day we heard various statements. His point of view, and every day we heard various different calls. I think that either someone is influencing him or he is drawing such conclusions on his own.
Nevertheless, the Ukrainian president has now officially awarded the entrepreneur one of the country's highest state honors for his contribution to protecting people's lives, freedom, and the development of relations between Ukraine and the USA.